Hi, I'm Nina Amenta. I'm a computer scientist who works with the Institute for Transportation Studies. And I want to talk to you today about something going on at Google. Google Flights has a new interface for picking airline flights. As you can see in this screenshot, in addition to showing you information about the flight, like how long it takes and what the exact times are and how much it costs, they also show you how much CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases the flight emits. Okay, and you can see that the first flight emits about half a ton of CO2, and the second one is still a lot, but 14% less. Okay, this seems really exciting. Angela Sanguinetti, an environmental psychologist at ITS, and I have been researching this kind of interface for flight search for several years. And our research suggests that people actually are going to use this information, this extra information that they're getting, to choose lower carbon flights. Okay, so this is significant. Air travel is 2.5% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. And it's emitted by a very small number of wealthier people who do all the flying, okay? And for people who fly, it's always a significant part of their carbon footprint. And for someone who's either a very frequent flyer or who leads a very low emissions life the rest of the time, it could even be the majority of their carbon footprint, okay? And as we saw on the last slide, two flights for the same route can differ in emissions by, as much as 30%, sometimes 50%. So it makes a big difference which flight you're taking. All right, so people have known this for a while, and people who worked on accounting for greenhouse gas emissions and trying to get people to lower their greenhouse gas emissions have been interested in getting this into flight search for quite a while. 10 years ago, people started doing this with this idea of browser extensions. The idea is that you add some software to your browser that puts the emissions information onto the screen whenever you visit a flight search site. Like here, you're visiting Kayak, and this browser extension, Kalasi, is sticking some extra information on here, things for you to click to find out about emissions. Okay, this is really clever, but it's very difficult to maintain, because the search sites change all the time and the browsers change all the time. And it's hard to get users to install the browser extension. Okay, it would be much better to have, like Google is now doing, a flight search that actually just shows you the information as part of your search. Okay, so Angela and our first move was to make a flight search website that did this, okay? This was a program called Greenfly, and you can see here a Greenfly screen for a flight to Honolulu, and you've got this interface that's showing you the CO2 emissions and the price at, sort of exactly the same level of importance on the screen. This was using, ironically, an API, a source for information about possible flights that Google made available, and it's no longer available. So Greenfly is now just a demo. It never became a product that people could use widely, okay? But what we did do is we started doing research about whether people would actually use interfaces like this, okay? So let's talk about this recent paper that we did. It was a survey of UC Davis employees about their business travel. And we showed them pairs of possible flight choices using this carbon forward interface. And they would just say, okay, of these two flights, which one would you prefer? And we got almost 500 UC Davis employees to respond to this survey. UC Davis employees are extraordinarily eager to help. And then we took that information and used that to construct a model that indicates how much weight they put on each factor in their decision. I mean, this is obviously grossly oversimplified model of how people choose a flight. But anyway, So using this grossly oversimplified model, we could estimate that, for instance, the average traveler is willing to pay about $184 a ton to avoid emissions in their flight. In other words, to reduce the cost of the flight by a ton, they would pay $184. Of course, in real situations, it's more like they're reducing it by a smaller amount and paying a smaller amount. Okay, so this rate of willingness to pay is much larger than typical carbon offset prices. For instance, carbon offsets are often, $5 a ton or $10 a ton, or maybe at most $25 a ton. And here we've got people paying 184. In an earlier study using members of the general public, we found that people were willing to pay $192 a ton. Okay, so much greater willingness to pay. Okay, in addition to being willing to pay to reduce carbon emissions, people are sometimes willing to use it in other trade-offs. Okay, so for instance, for a Davis traveler, you could go to the nearby Sacramento airport and get a flight with a layover, or if you're willing to go to San Francisco, you can get a nonstop flight. Okay, and according to our model, these two flights for this traveler would be a complete toss-up. Okay, he's equally happy to take either one. So when you show him that the nonstop flight has less emissions, it's easy. It breaks the tie, and they're willing to endure the additional inconvenience and accept the additional comfort of a nonstop flight. They're more eager to do that because it saves carbon. Okay, so let me suggest that you try this next time you're choosing a flight. Use the Google Flights interface, and it could actually make a noticeable difference in your carbon footprint. All right, the big question is, what's going to happen now that this interface has been adopted by a huge flight search engine like Google Flights? So for the UC Davis business travelers, we calculated that we could reduce CO2 emissions by air travel by 4%. Okay, so this is actually quite a bit if you think about the fact that the White House goal for reducing emissions by air travel is 20% by 2030. Okay, 4% gets you a big chunk of the way there, just by changing the flight search interface. Okay, of course, on a global level, well, you've reduced your personal carbon footprint, but aren't you forcing other people to take those high emitting flights? We are hoping that that this interface on Google Flights is going to cause pressure on the airlines to offer lower emissions flights, for instance, by scheduling maybe more nonstop flights, by buying newer aircraft. Okay, there's things they can do right now. And ultimately, it's going to have, if there's consumer pressure to reduce emissions, hopefully that'll increase pressure on the big research problems that are holding us back with air travel, like switching to batteries, hydrogen, or biofuels. Okay, and then finally, we're interested in whether seeing how much CO2 flights emit is going to encourage people to fly less. Okay, you could worry that maybe by being able to choose a lower carbon flight, people will be, they'll allow themselves to fly more. And that's certainly a psychological effect. But there's also another psychological effect that kind of fights with that, which is once you've started doing some kind of ecological behavior, it kind of encourages you to do more ecological behavior. Okay, and I think the fact that flying is so expensive in terms of emissions is not really well known. And this interface is going to help the public see just how expensive that is. Okay, thank you very much.